I'd recommend to the board that you do this process, that you think about forming a committee that would probably be made up of some board members and then also other groups. So you really, I think, get a lot of input. It's transparent as well. I think using focus groups and DLR is going to talk a little bit about that, how those work. I think anything we can do to make sure it's transparent, that people have a lot of input, and that they have voice is going to be a positive. The one thing I'd probably recommend to the board too is thinking about, maybe looking at like a 5-year plan. Once you start getting out a long ways, if you start doing a 20-year plan or 15, 10, it gets so far out that it's really hard to commit to anything. So a 5-year plan is really doable. It's clear. It's things you can work towards and so forth. It's very tangible. The other thing I would tell the board to think about in your discussions is to look at a process that follows a timely timeline. So a 4 to 6 month process, that recommendations come from this committee. So people can see that moving forward. I get the sense from board members, they really want to have this discussion. They really want to see things move forward. And so not stringing it out, because one thing you want to keep in mind is any type of construction projects you're looking at for next year, those decisions probably have to be made with the bidding process and so forth. You have to start bidding those out probably no later than January, February, maybe the latest. So if we want to do anything in the near future, major, you want to think of a timely process of 4 to 6 months. So with that, John, did you want to add anything before we start with the presentation? Did I forget anything?
I don't think so. Okay. I think you mentioned just kind of where we're starting, and then when we get into it, Mike, can you hear us okay, Mike?
Yes, I can.
Okay, yeah. When Mike gets started, once we've got, there's a his presentation, I'll share it, and then when we hit some financial topics, I'll kind of jump in. So I might interrupt you just to hit on a couple things while you're going on the finance side, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it at the end.
So tonight what we're going to do is basically you'll get an overview of our physical plant needs. We'll give you an overview of how the recommendation how to move forward as a group. And John and Mike also has some information in his PowerPoint about financial options, because I think it's going to be really important for the board to know what are all of our funding options, how much can we levy through that process, so we have some idea of what we can look at. So with that, I want to introduce Mike Carroll from Estes Construction. Mike is a former graduate of Ottumwa, so he knows Ottumwa well, and he's done some work for us in the past to put together a presentation tonight that he'll go through with the board. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be back. Nancy and Jeff, we've met before.
Yes.
I'm not sure I've met any of the other new board members, but I'm really pleased to be back. And just by way of introduction, I graduated from Ottumwa High School in 1971, went to grade school at Horace Mann, and went to junior high at Worston Junior High School, which is that big empty space up on the hill now. That was kind of my background in Ottumwa. I still come to Ottumwa. My mother-in-law still lives there out at Pennsylvania Place, so we get down there every once in a while. Near and dear to my heart, so glad to be back. John, do you have the presentation up?
Nope, I'm going to share my screen now so everybody can see it, so give me just a moment.
All right. You let me know when we're ready.
I will do that. Okay, we're good to go.
All right. Well, you can go right to the next slide. First of all, Estes is a part of the Iowa Association of School Boards ICAP program, which is Iowa Construction Advocacy Team. We partner with them, and your district, as a member of IASB, gets a lot of value and services out of that at no particular cost. So to date, there's been a small fee for the assessment we've done. Other than that, everything we've done has been as a result of your membership in Iowa Association of School Boards. So, and continues to be up until the point we talk about later. One of the things we do is study district needs and help formulate long-range plans, which is what we're going to start talking about tonight. We identify needed improvements and repairs with on-site assessments. We did an on-site assessment in October of 2018, and we updated that in May of 2020 along with all your other facilities. So we did 5 facilities in 2018, updated those, and did 7 additional facilities in 2020. And so tonight we're going to look at determining next steps and priorities. John, you can go to the next slide, please. And the assessment items, the costs that are included in the assessment, we include all construction costs and ranges for those costs. So if you've looked at the assessment at all, you'll notice there's a range of costs in there. I'll explain that a little bit later. All design and construction management fees are included in those numbers, as well as contingency numbers for those items. Things you should be aware of that are not included in those numbers are any land or property acquisitions that the district might need to make for the project, any financing costs, placing of bonds and that sort of thing, and no escalation or inflation are included in those numbers. So the assessment, you've seen it. This is a table of contents, so there's an executive summary, a summary of the assessment, and then it goes directly into the specific facilities that we look at. And this shows you a map of all of the facilities that we've assessed for the district and their locations in the district. You're probably more familiar with that than I am, but you can see there's a number of them there. On the executive summary, this basically just tells you what we did, how we did it, and the one thing in red there that I want to make sure you're aware of, that it's really intended to be used as a planning tool to assist the district in making decisions needed in achieving short and long-term facility goals. It contains data and exhibits meant to objectively describe the condition of your facilities and what it might take to bring them up to code or up to educational standards. Next slide, John. This is just a district overview, and you can read that. Again, it talks about some of the goals and the core beliefs of the district and some about the community. On the next slide. And then the probable cost ranges. As you're reading through the assessment, you should be aware of a number of things. First of all, the cost ranges include those items shown there, bonds, insurance, associated fees, and all that, as well as soft costs. And soft costs are defined as things such as furniture, fixtures, and equipment, other sorts of things that it takes to actually do the project that aren't necessarily hard construction costs. And go back, please. Thank you. While the assessment is segmented into individual items, you can go to there, the costs are not put together to represent doing those on an individual basis. So our cost data looks at, for instance, if you were going to do a particular facility and look at updating the accessibility of that particular facility, you would have to take all of the accessibility items as one project in order for those cost ranges to be somewhat accurate. So just to make sure that you know that those elements are meant to be compounded and not just to be done individually. And inflation can vary with construction. It's 4 to 8% per year. So this assessment can be used as an ongoing planning tool, but you need to remember to add that escalation as time goes on. So we want to make sure of that. And they're not based on actual costs or bids. They're based on our historical cost data. So as projects come on board, variances will occur, but they're really meant to be data for a planning tool for the board and the district on an overall basis. Next slide, John. This talks about some of the abilities and financing options, just some of your financial situations in the district. And John, you can talk about that later here if you want to. And then one more slide. And this talks specifically, this information came from Piper Sandler, and we work closely with them as you move through your master planning and as you decide to bring projects online. We work very closely with Piper because they are the ones that really know where you are financially, what you can do with regard to your finances, and how all that plays out with regard to taxes and other funding sources. We work very closely with them as things move along.
Yep, Mike, and I'll hop in here for a second just to share with the board. We'll go into much more detail towards the end, but the couple pieces or the things to keep in mind is that the sources we have for any kind of capital projects are somewhat limited. You've got your physical plant and equipment, so your PEPAL money, and we'll go into more detail about that. Then you've got your sales tax revenues or the SAVE funds, and then we've got bonds that can be issued against those sales tax funds, and those are called revenue bonds, and they do not affect the property tax rate. You're basically just borrowing the monies that you're set to collect over the next 20 years in that sales tax fund. And then you've also got your general obligation bonds, and the difference in those is that those are the ones that are directly funded by taxpayers through the property tax. So you want to borrow 20 million or 15 or whatever the number is, they assign an amount per thousand that you would add to your property tax levy, and that's how those are repaid over the course of the bond. So revenue bonds are not funded through property tax. General obligation bonds are. That's an important distinction to make. And then there's also you've got general funds that you can make a contribution to a capital project. If you have reserves, basically. So when we talk about like our solvency ratio and our reserves, if we wanted to dip into those a little bit, and I'll kind of go through some numbers at the end to kind of give you an idea how much you could pull and what effect that would have, but you can also pull from those also for capital projects. So the combination of those is the main place that you would get monies for projects. The one difference too is sales tax revenue and PEPAL. The only thing you can spend those funds on are capital improvements, technology purchases. You can't pay teachers with those or salaries or buy instructional materials, so they have to be used for that purpose. General fund obviously can be used for anything, but just a point to make with everybody is, if the general fund is in a certain condition and you're spending sales tax monies and PEPAL monies, it's not because you don't want to use those funds to pay more to the teachers or staff or do things like that. That's what they're obligated towards. You have to spend those monies on those things. Couldn't move it anywhere else if you wanted to. So, and we'll go into more detail once this is done and once DLR speaks. And not enough to put you to sleep, but just enough to give you some better idea on some of it. So I'll give it back to you, Mike.
Okay. One thing to keep in mind as you move along with Piper, and they'll guide you through this, but there are ways to leverage your SAVE funds against a general obligation bond in order to keep your tax rate from going up as much as it normally would. So just keep that in mind. They'll guide you through that. That happens quite often. Next slide, please, John. This is just an indication of what some of the next steps might be. The process certainly doesn't end with the assessment here. Actually, this is the start of building a strategic facility master plan, and DLR is going to go into that a little more detail here later. But just rest assured, we're always here to help you through this process and to get through these next steps in order to get you to some very valuable projects in the industry. Next slide, John. This gives you an idea. This is one facility. This is Horseman Elementary. And we divide the items into safety and security, building improvements, site improvements, and accessibility. And those are all divided in that way for a reason. But each specific facility has a detailed breakdown of the items we found in the assessment. One thing you should realize is we do no destructive investigation. So we don't drill holes in anything, we don't look behind walls, we don't look above ceilings. We really depend on your facility staff, and Chuck did a good job of letting us know anything that maybe we might not see but might be a problem as we go through these. So these are all non-destructive observations. And then new facilities would be anything additions, secure entrances, anything that are actually new construction on that facility to bring it up to code or up to standard. And then you can see a total for each one. Now the ranges, there's a low range and a high range, and that's basically because of decisions that would be made through the design of the project and choices that you would make as a district for materials you might use, or how extensive you might do some things or not other things. So that's why there's a range of low to high there. This is the high school, same thing. We don't need to spend a lot of time on it. It's just to show you those two facilities. It's divided the same way. And then we have a breakdown of these same costs. And you'll notice that the totals in all of these are the same, but we have a breakdown low to high of each facility that we assess. So that's the first part of it. And then the total cost by category. So in all of your facilities, safety and security, that's what the safety and security, low and high range for all of the facilities would be. Building improvements for all of the facilities. So that's divided by the 4 categories that we put the assessment items in. Next slide, John. And then by priority. So we have priorities A, B, C, and D. A was urgent, which means they need to be done as soon as possible. Required are things that would be required by code or accessibility and should be done soon. Recommended are items that we would recommend be done in order to bring you up to either code or educational standards. And those are probably what you would think of a 1 to 5 year item. And then suggested are items that would be suggested for 21st century learning, and I guess you might call that, I don't know if you call it frosting on the cake, things that would bring you really up to snuff on all of your facilities. Then the rest of these are a graphic representation of those numbers. So average cost by category, there you can see a pie chart that shows you what those are, and you can see building improvements are the largest portion of that pie. Average cost by priority, again, you can see how that breaks out and what part of the pie is the largest. Next one, John. And then this is average cost by facility. So you can see that the high school is largest average cost, followed by Wilson, then Horsham, looks like James, Eisenhower, and then the rest of the facilities. This is a representation of the cost per square foot. If each of those facilities were, the improvements were made on each of those facilities. So you can see your older facilities are certainly have a higher cost per square foot in order to bring them up to snuff, and you can tell which ones have the highest cost per square foot. I will say at this point, it shows in this graph that you've done an excellent job of keeping your facilities up. The older a facility gets, the harder it is, and you can't necessarily bring all of them up to 21st century standards, 21st century learning standards. But you can certainly tell that your facilities are being taken care of looking at this chart and how some of those square foot costs pan out. Next slide, John. I think I'm going to stop here. I've got a bunch of more slides, and in your packet you had a bunch more slides. But what they are is it just shows you what's included as backup and information that we've included to show you where the costs came from. So there'll be photos in there of existing conditions and photos of existing conditions and what new conditions might look like to give you an idea of what some of those solutions might be and where they would be located and the probable cost of each of those. I could spend a lot of time with those, but you have them in your booklets, and unless you have any questions, I'll stop here and see if you have any questions, and then if you don't, we'll go on to let DLR talk about the master plan.
I guess I have a question. I mean, can you explain, like, the Estes? I know that you have a partnership with ISB, but could you explain? I mean, obviously, you're in business to do this kind of thing, and you know what we've asked you to do is look at our facilities. And, you know, that's a small fee, but I guess looking at, you know, where do we go from here? How does that involve Estes going forward? Or what? 'Cause I remember, I think you
Yeah,
presented.
that's a good question. And, we have a master contract with the district. And that really covers us for doing what we do with IASB. Once a project comes online, we would sign an amendment, and in that master agreement, it spells out, depending on the size of the project, what the fees would be for that project. So as a project comes online, we would then sign an amendment with the district that adds that project to our master agreement. And all of that is then approved by the board and signed by the board, and then brings us on as a construction manager for a fee.
And could you explain to the board, I guess, the difference between a construction manager and a general contractor?
Sure. A construction manager as agent is a way for public entities to have construction expertise and construction management on board prior to actually completely designing and bidding a project. So you might say, well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is you're going to get the input and the expertise of a construction entity as the projects are being designed. And so at each stage along design, we'll do a constructability review, a budget review, and help DLR with selection of elements and materials in order to keep your projects within budget and on track schedule-wise. Where the other way around, you're kind of, for lack of a better word, you're working in the dark until it's bid, and then contractors take a look at it. And that's the first time you find out whether you're over budget or whether there are constructability issues, those sorts of things. So we really work hand in hand with DLR in order to make sure that all of those little wrinkles are worked out ahead of the bids coming in. And then we take bid packages on different parts of the project, and then manage those contractors to build your project.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Well, thanks for the time, and Eric and Andrew, are you there?
Yep, I'm here, Mike. It's
Yep.
possible to click in.
Yeah, Andrew's here, so we're going to figure out how to get him to share here. So, what I might have to have you do is share it.
Okay.
Can I have you do that?
While you're doing that, I also
So,
will say I
I will-
appreciate you letting me
Are
participate
you-
virtually. I'm still,
you got the Zoom invite.
hibernating.
So if you kind of just how I did it, like join and then
Yeah.
share it, I think that's going to work best.
Okay.
So then I'll make sure to let you in.
Is there a meeting password everywhere?
What's that?
Meeting password?
There is, yeah.
Oh, here it is, 263-015.
Yep. You found it. There you are. Alright. So once you join, just mute it.
Yep.
So it doesn't
Yeah, I
echo
told
back.
it not to
And
connect
yep,
to audio, so
volume down and you
no.
should be good, and then you can share.
Perfect.
And we'll all see it. Alright.
That's what I look like without a mask on, so in case you're wondering. Alright, let's see.
says you're
Try to
sharing.
stop. Try to stop sharing, resharing. It says it's sharing, but.
Okay.
we
Oh,
go.
there you go. Just
Alright.
took a second.
Yeah, I'm looking over the hotspot here. Let's see.
Oh, okay.
That might be why.
Okay.
If it stays slow, it goes fast.
Just click it about 5 seconds before you're ready to go.
Yeah. Almost like do you know the password to jump into the local Wi-Fi?
Oh,
chance?
where's my tech guy?
Alright.
I think it's maybe Bulldog 1. Bulldog, yeah.
I'll try the 5-second hold here. Alright. Sorry about that. We should be good now.
If it doesn't work, you can send it to me and I'll do it.
Okay. So just a quick intro here. Obviously, I'm Andrew. Mike is virtually, and then Eric Barron, you've all met him. He's had another commitment tonight, so but he will be a part of this process as well. With DLR Group, we're an architecture and engineering company, and one of our major market sectors is K-12 education. So I've been with DLR Group for 13 years, and I've worked primarily in educational facilities across the state and the region. So do a lot of master plans, and look forward to the opportunities here. So jump forward, there's Eric. Assessment overview, Mike did that component, so that's kind of the bricks and mortar, the physical assessment of facilities. So part of the
Excuse me, can we crank the volume a little bit, please?
Sir, Mike, I can speak.
It's that thing right there.
Alright.
So,
Maybe I'll just direct myself that way.
I don't think we can move it much, but
Okay. I'll talk that way. There we go. All right, so the master planning process, there's physical needs assessment, which Mike and his team have assessed, and then there's the educational and functional needs of a facility. So really for us, it's a matter of taking those two together and identifying where the needs are from a physical and educational assessment, so that we can identify the needs at each facility and develop what Mike mentioned is a long-range master plan looking at the 5-year future, and then reassessing at that time and continuing to evolve and set that vision for the district. So here's a little bit of a timeline of what that may look like. Again, starting with the primary focus of setting goals. As Ms. McCrory said, kind of a blank slate here, wanting to vet all the options and consider all the items and potential opportunities. So we'd want to do some visioning and goal setting with you all, a stakeholder group, or whoever that may be that you want to have work with our team throughout this process. Mike and his team have done some of the design team walkthroughs and looked at the physical assessment. We want to continue that conversation with additional stakeholders to gain further input and identify those needs. We're also going to look at the current program offerings and the conditions of those. For example, what types of coursework is being offered in the science curriculum at the high school, and maybe what opportunities or goals you have for that program specifically. Or career and technical education, a lot of things have changed. Do your career programs match what the workload is asking for the region and the community here? So we want to look at those things and say, hey, if we want to have advanced manufacturing or a culinary arts or a health and wellness healthcare strand in our school, those are things to consider and talk through here, and we can help design and coordinate facilities that can support those types of programmatic needs. We'll look at trends and deficiencies, and of course the financial assessment that will be critical towards trying to take the ideas and the vision and make that a reality. So as I mentioned, clicks here, there we go, goal setting. We want to get a good range of stakeholder involvement, so talking to students, staff, administration, parents, community members, business partners, your all input in the process here to really understand what the goals are and visions are for your community based on the feedback and the data that is provided in the physical assessment of your buildings and the educational assessment. So kind of that visioning, goal setting, where do we want to go from here? The stakeholder input would be interactive and engaging. We would do various exercises to really kind of assess where we're at today and where we want to be, and then do a little bit more of a needs assessment as far as where we want to go and what's our comfort level for change. So we use a couple of different activities that we use for workshops and visioning. that will assess the different comfort level for where we want to go and kind of do some divergent thinking, and then at the end do some convergent thinking so that we think of all the possibilities and then come together with a unified vision. In our experience, there's a lot of different stakeholders. You can see on the left and right of this next slide here, and then there's a lot of different, priorities. So safety, quality, excellence, fun, on budget, personalized. All those different things and ideas and goals happen. So it's the task of our team to help bring those together and to realize those into a master plan for the future of the district. So the next couple slides talk about that physical assessment, which is in the report, that lengthy report that you have an overview of tonight. And then our team will assist and look at some of the demographic enrollment projections. So understanding where there's growth, we'll go back to the history and see where things have been. We'll look at it from an enrollment standpoint. We'll also look at it from a grade level configuration or breakout standpoint. And then based on some of those, the trends of where we're at, we'll look at a couple different rates of growth, whether it's 1%, 2%, 3%, to help us identify when we reach a certain point in time along this chart of growth, certain decisions and certain things may have to happen. You may have to do X, Y, Z at the high school, or you may have to look at increasing your elementary capacity. So these analyses will help us determine when those trigger points are. So you may say at year 2030, we know we're going to have to do X, Y, Z if we have a continued rate of growth of 1%. So a lot of data. It can get a little dry and boring if you're not a data junkie, but it is helpful to help make data-driven decisions. So when you talk to your community and your constituents, you can give them the feedback and the data behind why these decisions were made. It wasn't just because it feels right, we think it's right, we looked at the data and assessed that this is the right decision. If you want to go really deep in a demographic analysis, I'm not a demographer, I'm an architect, but we would offer up a company named RSP and Associates. They do a much deeper dive in demography, and that would be a separate contract with them. But if you're okay with kind of the comfort of looking at the history and then grading it by different rates of growth, we can accomplish that pretty easily. So I know some districts that are seeing tremendous growth have used them to help assess where they are going to be to help kind of identify future building locations. Then from a functional assessment, the educational side, we'll look at curriculum. Again, the course offerings in your departments. Mostly at the high school, this tends to play into the decision making at the end of the day. So we can see the courses that are offered, the number of enrollment we have in each course, how many periods are scheduled a day, and do we have the spaces to support that. So we can then see if there's an enrollment increase, where are going to be those tight pinch points in some of our course offerings, and are there other courses that we want to offer that are not here yet today, and so the space, does the space support that? So you're looking at current enrollment, projected enrollment, and then what the space requirement may be needed to add. And then we'll look at the environmental assessment here. So these are some of the maybe more intangible things about a space. It can be a little subjective in nature, but we try to take it down to some various elements within each one of these. So when you think about 21st century learning spaces, you talk about collaborative spaces, spaces that support project-based learning, hands-on learning. Those are different types of spaces than maybe what we traditionally know as a classroom or a school system. So how is the furniture supporting education today? Is it flexible? Is it comfortable? Are there outdoor spaces that are leveraged for learning? So these are a little bit, like I said, subjective in nature, but we can kind of benchmark those against what your peers are doing and benchmark against each other. Maybe at one elementary, you've got a really good outdoor classroom, but the other elementaries don't have that opportunity. So how can we provide some parity and equity among the schools? And then we'll look at future programming. If there are new spaces built, we'll look at what would let's say a 4-section K through 5 elementary look like, a new build, compare that to what we have currently. and we'll see some of the deficiencies in some of our existing schools as well. So a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of data, but the end result for our team is to help arm you with that information, to help make decisions. Coupling that with the physical assessment will help us begin to develop some options. And when I say help us develop options, I mean all of us, because there'll be a group of stakeholders, whether you're going to meet as a board, or whether there's a committee that's established, that's the team that really has to own it and be a part of that decision-making process. So once we have that data and information compiled in the master planning process, we would identify various, you'll see in the bottom, maybe a couple different scenarios. So some things that would happen in option A, some things that would happen in option B. And they would all have a financial impact. They'd also have a length of construction and timing impact. But these are the types of processes and tools that will arm you with to help kind of vet those different decisions and move things from, well, we don't want to spend $9 million in the first 5 years, so we need to move a few of these into another category to help us manage the budget or help us make sure there's enough equity among facilities across the district. So we'll develop options. We may not get into plans that show where every last door would be or every last outlet, but we will say, hey, if we need to add on to the middle school, we could do it potentially here or here. They're not by any means finalized plans, but they're just plans to help the conversation and say, yes, it's possible, but the detail would come much, much later when the actual project started. And then working with ESSIS on budgets, whether it's a renovation budget or new construction, looking at sites and buildings. We work, of course, collaboratively on that process to help vet the different options to help develop those costs of renovations and additions for master planning projects. And then the thing I'd like to suggest too is thinking about learning environments for the future. So we do some assessment of and vision of where we are today and what education has been like, and then talk about the types of facilities we want to provide for students moving forward. So collaborative, flexible, transparent, technology-rich, really trying to find a way to establish a connection between the learning and the actual facility itself. So we want to do a little bit, like I said, divergent thinking of what the possibilities could be for education and space, and then with that in the back of our mind, taking the data and formulating that master plan based on the vision moving forward. Just kind of flip through these here just to talk about some of the things that we'll look at. We'll do kind of map out what a day in the life of a student may look like at elementary, middle school, high school, and understand the types of spaces that are needed for those students and staff. Because it's yes, it's about it's about a master plan, but it's more than just space. We think the space can really have an impact on the way students can learn, the way teachers can teach. So we want to make sure that these facilities are supporting that based on the goals of the district. So with that kind of next steps in discussion, I think one of the questions would be, how long does this take? What does this look like? And I'll say that we have a framework set up, but every district, every board, every administration is different that we work with, and that's why we just have a framework. Through a series of workshops, typically we start with about 4 or 5, but we can add or subtract as we customize and cater the process together. So this is just, again, a sample of what this might look like with some of the workshops, with a little bit deeper dive and understanding the physical and educational needs of spaces, meeting with the administrative team. If the full board is not a part of this committee, we want to come back and update the board and provide everybody with an update of how the process is moving forward. Talking to students and staff. Some communities want to do a community forum and reach out to the community and get ideas. But at the end of the day, we want to get to a point where we have a master plan moving forward, and that would get board approval for the vision of the district and where they want to go in the next 5 years. And then, funding is a different story. So some districts will pursue a bond campaign at that point. and go to a bond vote. Some will begin to knock off some of the deferred maintenance types of things or roof replacements. So it really depends on what that master plan the first 5 years looks like to determine how the funding might work. So, 4 to 6 months, we've seen these go as long as 10 to 12 months. It really depends on your community, your district, and where you're at and where you want to be. Like I said, it's a framework, so we would want to kind of customize that as we move forward. But generally, we see about 5 to 6 months of a process to get through the master plan. Just because if you were, for example, to take each one of these workshops as 1 month in the process, there'll be a lot of information presented, and it takes time to digest and think through it. So with that, we'd enter the master planning process here, board decision, and then begin the integration of some of those initial projects, whatever they may be out of that master plan. And then completion is at the bottom, but I really think as a master plan you want to continue to reevaluate. Things change, communities change, there's pandemics that change things, so continually updating a master plan, I don't think it should be a document that you sit here and it's on the shelf and it's perfect. It continually needs to be updated over time so that you can customize it based on the surroundings. So with that, I can open up for questions or go back to anything.
You mentioned that, I thought you had a place at RSP.
RSP and Associates, yep.
Yeah, is that out of like Kansas City?
Yeah, they're out of Kansas City, yep.
So we used that
Okay. Okay.
Free school.
Yeah. They'll go much deeper into demographics and look at housing developments and birth rates and things like that. So, yep.
Any questions?
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
You switch, I'll throw the finance stuff up there.
Here you go.
So I'm going to put this away so I'm not yelling at Jeff.
One thing I might offer, and I shared this with Mr. McGrory and John when we were talking, is this process is a fair amount of work, and Estes and DLR bring a lot of data to the table, and we bring a lot of critical thinking exercises to the table, but really all of the decisions and all of the structure of what the district's going to look like in the future really comes from the committee and the board and the people involved. So we're certainly there to offer help and considerations and opinions once in a while, but the solutions really come from the work that the board and the community is willing to put into this effort. That's one thing to keep in mind.
Okay, Jeff, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. I'm going to share my screen now. All right, another PowerPoint. Woohoo! Okay, so I'll make sure you can see all that. So what I'm going to talk about is just a couple funding streams, some of the details, some of the things Mike and I have discussed about maybe resources as they would become available, some additional opportunities for resources. Right now, you can fund capital projects locally through property taxes, and the 3 or 4 ways that can be done is through the physical plant and equipment levy, and I'm just going to call that the PEPL. There's an automatic 33-cent levy that the board approves every year. We have that in place. It's always been there, or it has been for quite some time. There's the voter-approved PEPL. So this we can add $1.34, and I'll kind of give you some numbers about what that generates. That's something that has to be approved by the voters and can go out to 10 years, I believe. The general obligation bonds, those are the ones we touched on a little bit. Those are ones where also takes voter approval, and you can levy up to $4.05 to fund capital projects. Ours is a little different than that. We'll touch on that. And then general fund reserve, so you can just take money from the general fund and use that towards a capital project if you have sufficient reserves. On the other side, you've also got your sales tax funds. The estimate for next year is about a little over $1,000 per student, so about 4.9 million. And we already get this. This is what we use to pay for some of the technology devices, the leases on the cycle. We use it to pay for a lot of our maintenance projects because the PEPL funds are not sufficient. And we also use it for existing debt servicing on the bonds that we already have for Dalma and Liberty and Pickwick. There were bonds issued for those projects. Okay, so I'll talk about the PEPL one first. Like I said, we get the 33 cents per thousand. It generates just under $280,000 a year. That's to maintain all of the district's facilities. I've talked to you a little bit about it before. It's not sufficient, not even close. We spend way more than that. But the tax base, that's what it generates, and that's kind of what we're left with. The scheduled facility maintenance projects, you can see in the middle there, over the next 5 years, this is what we show annually, and this is just off of Chuck's list, the 5-year maintenance plan really is what it is, just to keep the buildings up and running and to fix the things that need fixing and that we expect to break. It's 1.1 million in this coming year, about the same next year, 950, 770, 900. And the other thing to realize is on that 5-year plan that we have, there's a lot of things that aren't there because we can't pay for them with a single year's reserves. We've got to save up for them, or if you want to replace the HVAC system at Horace Mann, you're going to spend more than we have available in 1 year, so we'd have to look at setting some money back for a couple years to do a project like that. The voter-approved PEPL would allow the district at $1.34, we would generate about 1.1 million annually of additional funds. What this would do is allow us to shift the money that we're taking out of sales tax and pay for it all out of PEPL. So then you'd free up more money in your capital projects fund for capital projects, things like what Andrew and what Mike are talking about, where it's more of a big, larger scale project. We generate another 1.1 million, put that towards all the physical stuff that we already know exists, and then free up those funds for that. And we'll kind of I'll put it all together towards the end. That is voter approved, and just as a note, the next two upcoming election dates are September 2nd and March 2nd. Anything that you put before the voters, if it does not approve, you can't go back to them for at least another 6 months, I believe is the new rule. And the way they have the election calendar set up, it basically puts it off for a year. So you want to make very sure anything that's posed to the voters is likely to be approved, or else you get delayed a year. They made some changes to the election calendar that kind of hurts districts in that regard.
I might just mention that
Yeah.
the other thing that we take out of this to the PEPL right now that it's not sufficient is technology. So we basically take out our maintenance and the technology. So
Yep, and we hit both PEPL and sales tax on the technology side.
Does PEPL have to be a 60% vote or anything like?
I believe the PEPL is, I know bonds are 60%. I think PEPL is just a simple majority, 50 plus 1.
And John's going to show the board there will be a way if the board's interested in
Yep.
doing that, where tax wise, I think it would be very appealing to me.
Yep. Yeah. Just a quick touch on sales tax. Like I said, we get about $5 million annually. Revenue bonds, and that's the bonding you can do against that sales tax money. We passed an updated revenue purpose statement last year, so we're set to go. We can borrow against those. They extended that sunset, so we've got some capacity there. Excuse me. We have about a little under 18 million of outstanding revenue bonds, and that's the Dalma, Liberty, and Pickwick projects. The maximum revenue bonds, so I did talk to Piper Sandler, and he gave me some of the information and numbers. Maximum revenue bonds we could issue on a 20-year repayment plan would generate about $31 million in proceeds. So that's what we have available to borrow on revenue bonds, and what that that limitation is to make sure that our coverage ratio on the bonds stays where it's recommended. And if the board wanted to get into more detail, we'd bring Piper in to kind of go through a lot of the heavy details. But that's the number that he's calculating for us, is about 31 million. And those are bonds that, like I said before, they don't directly affect the property tax rate because you're just borrowing against that sales tax penny. General fund reserves, we can take a portion of those funds. The solvency ratio is something that comes into play there. IASB, Department of Ed, all the recommendations kind of give you a between 5 to 15% number, and that's a healthy solvency ratio. We've been 15 or slightly above here the past couple of years. We've got it projected based on kind of some of the things we're putting together to go out 5 years and hold us right about 14%. For each million you would pull out of there and contribute to a capital project, it drops a little under 2%. So if you wanted to take $2 million capital contribution out of the general fund, that 5-year picture drops the solvency ratio down to just about 10%. So it's all about where the board's comfort level is, about where you want to keep that and how low you want to draw it. A lot of that has to do is what we imagine the funding picture looks like over the next several years, because a lot of our assumptions are based on minimal but consistent SSA increases from the legislature, enrollment that continues the path that our current circumstances, it does take that into consideration, open enrollment, but it does look to see some improvements based on the preschool. So any changes to those, we kind of have to take a look at this and re-engineer it. But those are just some things as we're in uncertain times. Any big changes there, if the state comes out and says we're giving you 0% next year, that would have an effect on that as well. So bonding capacity. So this is something that we run into. There's a constitutional debt limit, so schools can only borrow up to 5% of the 100% property valuations in their district. So Ottumwa has the lowest property tax valuation per student in the state. Our total valuations are about $1.4 billion. So you take 5% of that, and the most we can have outstanding in debt is $70.94 million. I put some other districts on here as an example to show. Ames is similar size to us. Their property tax valuations are significantly higher. They can borrow $227 million. Fort Dodge, smaller than us, is still slightly above. Urbandale, mentioned those in the metro there, $2.5 billion. They can borrow $121 million. And then some smaller schools, Carroll, up in kind of northwest Iowa, 1,700 students, so very small, but they've got some great valuations. Must be good farmland up there. They can borrow just under $80 million. And Clear Lake up in northern Iowa, 1,200 people, but they are a property-rich district. Their cap is 120. So just kind of an idea that that's something that we do have to consider whenever we start talking about larger projects, is we do have a limitation in there that maybe some other districts that you see with some large facility projects do not.
John?
Yes.
I'll just make a quick comment there, and I don't know that this applies to any of those districts you were talking about, but the windmills that you see all across Iowa,
Yep.
some of these rural districts that have windmills in their districts, once those come off of the TIF program, it's the same as having a $2.5 to $3 million home in your district property valuation. So you see a district that has 20 or 30 windmills in it, makes a huge difference on that borrowing capacity.
Yeah. So we'll get out there and get some windmills, and Wapello County will be good to go. So taking that into consideration, right now the district does not have any GO bonds, general obligation bonds. They'd be financed by property taxes. When looking at that constitutional debt limit, what I had Piper do is I said, well, let's say we max out the revenue bonds because that's property tax neutral. If you take our current outstanding bonds, max out the revenue bonds, how much would we have left? And it's about $22 million. And that's what you could go to the voters for and ask if you wanted to do a GO bond issue. And that would generate a tax levy of about $1.85 to pay for those bonds. So, and that would be an additional piece. So that's kind of that's the biggest ask that you would have. Now we're going to shift back and talk about PEPL, and that one we talked about that generates one 1.1 million annually. So we've had a stable tax rate in Ottumwa for 10 plus years. I go back as far as I can. It's been right in the same range. It hasn't gone up a whole lot. 10 years ago it was 1479. This year it's 1471. So it's been nice. It's been maintained stable over the past decade. What we would be able to have we would be able to get a voter approved PEPAL and add that $1.34 per thousand tax levy and not negatively affect the property tax rates. And how we do that is we change the way that we fund our income tax or instructional support levy. So part of the property tax is an instructional support levy that was passed many years ago. We have to renew it this year, and what that does is it allows the district to either through property taxes or through an income tax surtax ask for an additional amount of monies to help fund instructional programs. We generate about 1.5 million annually from it. And right now, all of it is funded through property taxes. So it's been that way for at least 5 years. It's renewed every 5 years. And the language that I find, it's always been property taxes. We are the only district in our area that funds it that way, where it's entirely through property taxes. So our ask on the total property tax levy that the school asks for is, I want to say it's $1.60 some. So $1.60 of that levy comes from this instructional support levy. We can change the language to turn some of that or fund some of that through an income tax surtax. So when you do your taxes, as everybody's in Wapello County, when you get done with your state income taxes and it gives you the line that says you owe the state treasury $1,000. There's a line right underneath that that's school district or EMS surtax, and in Wapello County there's nothing. So there's no ad there, and you finish it out, and you pay your $1,000 to the Treasury. By adding a surtax, what we could do is add a 6% surtax. So when you owe $1,000 in state income tax, now there's a 6% surtax on that amount that you owe in tax. So 6% of $1,000 would be $60. You write your check to the Treasury for $1,060, and that's the way it's funded instead of asking property tax owners to fund it. So there's a couple benefits to that. First off, by reducing the amount we ask for that money in property taxes, it allows room to fit that voter approved PEPAL and generate additional funds to help capital improvements and the plant that we are short on right now. So you take that dollar, and it comes out being within 5 cents. I'm just going to use some numbers. We take $1.40 off the property tax levy. We add $1.34 back on. So the property tax levy actually goes down about 5 cents. We generate an additional 1.1 million in PEPAL funds, and we maintain the same level of funds in the general fund because we are now going to collect that through the income tax surtax instead of property taxes. Are you kind of following? I'm sorry, this is dry, it's horrible. It makes perfect sense to me.
It sounds really good.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
You seem to really know what you're doing.
The couple benefits to it when you shift the ask to income tax surtax is income tax is progressive. So if somebody doesn't owe any state income tax, so you got your low income and your fixed income residents, they don't pay any of the surtax. It doesn't. You can't. 6% of zero is zero. Okay, so the lower income taxpayers are let off the hook, where those same taxpayers may own property, and they'll see the reduction in the property tax rate to 5 cents or so. It won't be much, but you maintain the same tax rate and you're not asking any more of them, and you're able to fund it through a different means. So that's kind of the benefit to doing it. Like I said, we are the only district in the area that doesn't fund any of our instructional support levy through the income tax surtax.
One thing I would add to what John's saying is that district would use it in a couple different ways. Usually you would pay your yearly maintenance, usually comes out of your pay on PEPAL as well as technology. But you can borrow against this as well if you wanted to, up to 10 years, I believe.
You can borrow against the PEPAL.
Yeah,
Yep.
against the PEPAL. So if you were looking to do major projects, you could actually borrow against this too.
So the reason for shuffling is it lets our PEPAL amount come up higher where we can actually offset what the cost to run the district every year.
Right.
And then reissue it, under the instructional support. Is that what it was?
Yeah, the
So
You
you
a-
get a higher amount of something you can borrow against.
it generates more money in those capital project funds, in the PEPAL funds. It generates more money there, and it maintains the same level in the general fund where you pay for the teachers and everything else, and and you can maintain the property tax level at the same rate. The one thing that would be different is on the income tax part. So when you do your state income taxes at the end, we'd ask for a surtax. And that's kind of how the funds are generated. The benefit of it is, like Mike mentioned, you can borrow against those PEPAL funds. You could do PEPAL anticipatory loans or notes, I think they call them, if you wanted to. But the way that it benefits us is we would shift. We're paying for that stuff already. We're paying that 1.1 million in projects. We're just paying for it out of the sales tax money. By generating additional PEPAL, now we take those projects, we pay for it out of PEPAL where it should be, and the capital project fund resources grow. There's more available there. We can use that for the capital projects, and it also helps our bond coverage ratio. So maybe it opens a door to a little additional bonding capacity on that side.
So
it's
one of the differences, the PEPAL funds, if you borrow against them, they're shorter term.
yes,
As opposed to like a general obligation bond where you can drag that out 20 years.
right. The PEPAL, you can only borrow against the PEPAL as long as it is approved by the voters, and the most it can be approved is 10 years. So
that's the issue is for PEPAL, you would, if you did want to borrow against it for some reason, it has to be a shorter term
Yep.
payback.
yeah, and it wouldn't generate as much.
Right, it wouldn't generate as much.
Right. I would say it's probably more uncommon borrow against your PEPAL. It's probably very common borrow against your savings tax.
Yeah. Yep, that would be, yep, I'd agree with that.
Question, so is there a way to tell in Wapello County how many people pay on that tax return at the end? To estimate what we would receive? Is there, I mean, if you've got a lot of people that are owing zero.
Yeah, maybe. I haven't talked to the Treasury to see what information is public. I could probably try to find some of it to see kind of where it lines up. If we wanted to start moving forward to get an idea how many people pay zero state income tax. So the number of people that you would be able to say will see a reduction in their property tax rates and no change on the income tax. So we may be able to find that. I'm not sure how much of it's public, but possible. So yeah, we kind of talked about this, the overview. We could pass that voted PEPAL maintaining property tax levels, 1.1 million of funds each year in that PEPAL. We would kind of shift the allocation. We're paying for it now to save funds. We'd pay for it out of PEPAL where it should be. And general bonding would increase property tax rates. So this is kind of the whole big picture is revenue bonds, you've got 31 million. General obligation bonds, you could do 22 million. Voter approved PEPAL, it generates, I put in for 5 years, but you could do it for 10, at least $5.5 million. And general fund reserves, if you wanted to kick in $2 million. So you're in the ballpark when you start looking about capital. This is over 5 years. Capital funds available over the next 5 years, about $60 million, and that's tapping you out. That's borrowing what we can borrow. Like I said, we get that constitutional limit is about 70. Put all these things together, that's about what the district has resource-wise over the next 5 years available. A couple of things to consider: you're obligating your save funds for 20 years if you max them out. So make sure you get
Borrowing the max and keeping the solvency ratio at 10%.
the $2 million is that. Yep, it keeps it at 10.
That's also getting approval from voters.
Exactly. You've got to, as
Obligation.
it kind of came up, GO bonds, you need 60% approval. As an idea, in 2018-19, there were 34 districts that went out to ask for GO bonds. 18 of them passed. It's about 53%. 16 failed.
You did
So-
like 39 million without any voter approval.
You could do, 30, that's correct. Yep, about that. The 31, not quite 30, the 31 million in revenue bonds and the 2 million in general fund, those you could do. You can bond on those revenue bonds without voter approval. and you can spend your general fund reserves. But when you want to talk about doing a voter-approved PEPAL or GO bonds, you need to take it to the voters.
Just a question, and I probably know the answer to this, but I just want to ask it. Is there any way to create more funding through sales tax in the city or county?
I
Is that a
don't.
state issue?
It's state. Our local sales in Wapello County don't count. That's not what we get anymore. The state took it over a couple years ago once all the counties passed it. So all the sales tax in the state is combined, and they collect it down at the state level, and then they distribute it on a per pupil basis. So we get the funding based on the number of pupils. So if we have enrollment go up, that would see an increase in SAFE funds. Open enrollment doesn't affect it. We do not lose the money when they open and roll out.
So it's not even based on how much sales tax Wapello County collects?
Nope. It used to be several years ago, and then the state changed it because you've got counties like Wapello where you have some retail, and then maybe down in Davis County or somewhere where there's none, they were getting the short end of the stick. So they spoke up and it equalized it.
We benefited tremendously from that change. I tell you that.
Yeah.
You take Ames, they lost.
Yeah, where there were the big retail centers, they shared the wealth.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's not a whole lot that's movable in those figures. There are a lot of the numbers that Piper's using right now for sales tax. Is figuring a 3% decline in sales tax revenues next year, but it's a guess. They'll admit it's a guess. The state admits it. Nobody's for certain. Right now, they're not seeing a big decline in sales tax revenues. The internet sales tax rule took effect this year, so that's saving us a little bit, where everybody's staying at home buying on Amazon. Before, there would be no sales tax, and now there is, so it's kind of saving us a little bit. But as time goes on, if retail continues to kind of decline or employment dries up, you could see some drops there, but everybody's guessing at this point. Any other questions? Thank you for all staying awake.
Yeah. Like with that, that's kind of information you have for this evening. I think as a board, maybe the next step is to talk about how you would like, if you would like to move forward with it. One thing I'll throw in there, I don't want to muddy the waters, but I just sent the board. There's a piece of property that came up. It's called Market. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Market on Main. It's 331 East Main Street. I sent you information on that just came up for sale. They're asking $500,000 for that. It could be a piece of property that would be very valuable to the district for the following reasons. One is that it would be a nice complement to our high school programming, particularly in like family and consumer science and so forth. But also Spark Tank has a real interest. They would have a real interest in having that facility for their program as well. We currently lease the area we have for Spark Tank right now. They'd be very excited about that as well. It could also be just pragmatically used for board meetings. It'd be a nice facility if you want to actually have your board meetings there and so forth as well. But it's a nice piece of property for the district. I would probably need to get some sense from the board if you wanted me to even explore it, further, because they want to sell it. I think they really want it. They would love to see our district be interested in it because they think it's something that benefit our district. So I think they would really work with us, but they are going to try to sell it. So if you have any thoughts on that too, thoughts on
Do you know what I can't remember what we lease Spark Tank. Is it
25
$25,000 a year?
$2,500 a month, $30,000 a year.
Okay.
Yep.
Knew it was something.
we have.
Yep, and we got a multi.
So-
We have 3 years left.
Yeah, on a lease.
3 years
Oh,
left.
so we still have 3 years left
Yeah.
on that lease.
Yep.
No
And
problems
we
on that.
could get out of it, but we'd have to come up with some funds to pay for the capital improvements they made to the facility before we took it over.
I think for me, I would want to see those kind of numbers and how they, you know, if we could move Spark Tank into that building, that makes more sense than leaving Spark Tank where it's at and then buying another building next door and spending that kind of money. But I would want to see the numbers and how they come out.
Yeah. Lease and stuff.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with Jeremy. I also, see what program we can get in there, maybe some more specifics. Obviously,
Okay.
have Spark Tank, and we kind of understand that, but that building's probably 3 times bigger than Spark Tank, I'm guessing.
I think Spark Tank could probably go down in the front and take up that whole front.
I guess that would be, the big how would we.
Yeah, that's kind of my same concern, is I'd like to kind of know what the plan is for it, just about everything we can. Not saying that it would be a good addition.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not.
Location.
Yeah. Seems like space is one thing we can never have too much of.
Yep, I can do that. So you get, I think, going back to just master facility planning, the board, what is the board interested in moving forward with that?
Well, my thought, and I've been in the past on the board, we had and I know they have had it here recently too, the Building and Grounds Committee, Facilities Committee, whatever you want to call it. Which, when you get to the point of projects and being on the board for past projects, it's virtually impossible to have board meetings every time. Once you agree as a board that we want to move forward with, doesn't matter if it's Pickwick or Schaefer or what, you have to have a committee that can, meet, because we can't schedule board meetings, with open meetings law, it's just impossible. You'll never accomplish anything. So I think that, that getting back to that committee structure, getting 3 board members and staff, and if there's community members or however that needs to be, that's the only way you're really going to accomplish whatever the board chooses is the most important thing. So I definitely would like to see that back. It does make life a lot easier going forward with this stuff. Whatever we determine, but I don't know master facility planning. That's we as a board, we would have touched on this unfortunately with COVID. This would have been 3 or 4 months ago at least. So I think it would be good for the board. We need to have some, at least maybe our input, as to what we think, and then obviously, like you said, talking to stakeholders and how they feel. I think we as a board need to see, kind of where we're currently at and, what plans are going forward the next 5 years look like, and if there's something in there. I think we all kind of want to have input, I'm sure. It's probably going to be going to have more meetings like this where it is handled that way. Any thoughts? How you want to move forward on?
Dave, I agree with you. I think having a committee that can look at this, made up of stakeholders and staff and no more than 3 board members is a good way to get it going.
Yeah, we need to be able to meet with more frequency than we can.
Is there anybody on the board that is interested, putting together that?
I don't mean to interrupt, but I will, just to make sure you have this under consideration. Anytime you have more than 2 board members together on a committee, it's deemed a public meeting. So keep that in mind as you structure your committee. If you have 2 or less board members on the committee, it's not a public meeting.
you have,
change that.
you have 7 board members, right?
Yeah.
So you don't
We've
have-
got
you won't have a
7.
quorum.
Yeah.
Yeah, you won't have a quorum then.
It just came
Yep.
from majority.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Is that right, Mike? They have 7-member board, not 5. I'm pretty sure that's the case.
Yeah.
Oh,
Unless
okay.
they change the law.
Yeah.
Mike, I would be interested.
Okay. I guess I put it back to the board. Is there anybody not interested in moving forward with the master facility plan? Don't think it's a good idea.
I think everybody.
Okay. So with that, does everybody like the idea of forming a committee with having 3 board members? And then what I could do is put together a draft of a committee that you could look at as a board and decide if that looks good to you. And I could take names of board members now if you're interested in being on that committee. Like Jeremy said he's interested. There's 2 other board members that are interested in being on that group. Okay.
And I think, yeah, and you can even email, because Brian's not here, and I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
know where he stands.
Yeah.
On that, so I don't want to speak.
Yep.
Maybe just gauging interest with, an email.
Yeah.
If more than 3 people, then
Yeah.
draw straws or.
Dave,
Yeah.
in the past, in these committees, has there been a lot of day meetings or? When you start talking with other stakeholders and what their schedules are like, are they typically in the evening or days? I'm just trying to get an idea of what's.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you do?
So we're flexible. Typically we see them in the evenings. If you have a facilities committee that has business partners in the district or the community members, or other responsibilities they would need to tend to as well. But we have done them over like 11 till 1 or something like an extended lunch hour too. If that's more feasible, we can work with whatever. But evening is not a problem.
Well, I think in the world of Zoom, that wasn't
Right.
popular in the past.
Right.
We're a lot more flexible.
Yeah.
And we have tools we can leverage to do this virtually too, some visioning sessions as well. I think there's always value in being together, so if we need to find a space that we can spread out, that can work too, but, we can accommodate virtual or in person.
So I could send out an email to the board to see who's interested in being on it. Maybe come back at our next board meeting with a draft of a committee that you could look at and see if you think that's a good idea. That's a good group, and then we can go from there.
Yep, and I think the biggest thing is, and I know there's been, controversy in the past. There's just got to be that level of trust between the committee and the whole board.
Yeah.
That there's transparency and constant communication between, at least, so you feel like if you're not on the committee, you feel like you're being represented on something that's not going to catch you off guard. So I think that's the biggest key. But I think that's probably the starting point. And maybe at that, I don't know, the September 4th meeting, for some of that, I don't know, maybe some discussion there.
Yeah.
Potential.
Yeah, we could build that in.
Is there anything else that you
I think David, John, anything else that we're?
I don't think, did we miss anything? I think.
What's that? I
Did
don't
you?
think so.
I think I touched on all the finance stuff, so.
Yeah.
And Jeremy, I made a note to check out on that lease part, so I'll see kind of where we're standing. It's based on when, so we can figure that out.
Anyone else have any?
I just have a real short question.
Sure.
Drinking fountain, we're gonna be turning off some drinking fountains in the buildings, right?
Yes.
So we are replacing those with, filling stations, or how's that working?
Yeah, we are, Nancy, and I'll let Chuck answer this as well, is, I've been very appreciative of Chuck. They've been really proactive in putting in quite a few already, but we're looking at, I think, adding, is it 18 more bottle stations?
We've got 18 more ordered.
Because
The
I saw
problem
that
I'm
in the
running
plan.
into is LK has 70 back ordered through Plum Supply.
Okay.
Because everybody in the district or the southeast Iowa is ordering
Oh, yeah.
bottle
Oh,
fillers.
yeah.
So my question is, and I'm gonna ask, because you brought it up.
Yeah.
Is, you know, we have a couple of options. We either keep some drinking fountains going until they come in. Because as soon as they come in, they're installed. We've installed, I'm gonna say 7 or 8 in the last 2 weeks. And I got a plumber that will install them as soon as they get here, but I can't find any. We have 18 coming. So, my question to you guys actually is, do we leave a few working? Or do we look at possibly bringing water bottles in? And, you know, I've talked to Dr. Pepper Snapple today, actually. They're our exclusive supplier for that type of thing. And, you know, it's $13 a case. So my suggestion is, if we possibly could, is to leave a few of the cold water drinking fountains working, if we possibly can, and then we replace them as quick as we can. I think, you know, that's just kind of what I'm asking of you guys. Yes, we do have 18 ordered. As soon as they get here, they'll be put right in. Now, having said that, we've installed a lot of them already. High school's probably got 8 or 9 bottle fillers already. The ones I'm worried about, I have one at Liberty, guys, one. It was put in with a grant 2 years ago or so. We're putting 2 in at Dalma this week, so they should have 2 at Dalma, should be good. 3's my goal. But the bigger schools, you know, I had 1 or 2 at Wilson. Forest Man's got 2. You know, so we do have some, every building has some.
Okay,
But my guess is if we could possibly leave some of the cold waters going, clean them extra good on a regular basis, or look at the water bottles, because that's my 2 options at this point.
My 2 cents would be, I would not be a fan of keeping the fountains on, because they're right now, insurance-wise and so forth.
Well, especially if every school's got at least one.
Yeah.
Maybe you gotta wait to use all of them.
I don't mind the idea of, I think for a short term, you wouldn't want to do it long term, but having the bottled water option, instead of adding some of those the first month or so until you get new ones, and it makes sense to me.
Well, like elementary classrooms, a lot of those have, sinks with faucets.
We're unhooking all the,
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
right.
so you cannot use those as a bottle filler.
we're unhooking them as we speak.
Okay, all right, never mind.
The other,
I'd be open to your suggestions, and I kind of did, I told John, I did a little bit of figuring. That's dangerous for me, but I look at 700 kids at Liberty. If half of them did the water bottle filler and half of them needed a drink, it'd be a $900 and some a week
Oh, you're kidding, that's.
at $13 a case. So, you know, and that's only one kid getting one drink. So, I mean, I'm just throwing this out. It's just, that's what worries me is, you know, I just only have one bottle filler.
Other questions?
Back to the facility discussion, I feel like we've, like, 90 minutes worth of good information, I appreciate that, but I don't feel like we've, like, moved anywhere. Like, is there any consensus, like, where the group, like, wants to start first?
itself can, you know, dig in a little bit, but I think, you know, for us to be able to decide and even have those conversations, maybe like I said, the September 4th meeting is, I mean, 3 of us may have the same idea on this and 4 of us don't like that idea at all.
Right,
And
but I
so-
feel like the board is who needs to direct the committee to say like, okay, I'm just gonna make up this, example, because this has came up a few times. Like, we want, again, I'm just making this up, this isn't my opinion, but if we want a new middle school and a high school, let's say, I feel like the board should be directing the subcommittee to say, okay, work through like some of the details about location, time, place, that kind of thing, versus I feel like I'm gonna, like, I don't want to be on the subcommittee because I feel like I'm pretty maxed out on my time commitment to things other than work, but I guess I'm asking for the best of both worlds, like, how do I be involved, and maybe I can't, maybe the only way to be involved is to be on the subcommittee, but I guess I didn't picture a committee of non-board members telling the board, like, where do we go next?
Well, I think the board still
The board still have-
I mean, like a subcommittee would still come back to the full board and say, here are some of the options that we've talked about. And then we as a board still say, we want you to go this way
Yeah,
or
I guess I
this
thought
way.
that's what we would do tonight,
Oh, well,
Okay.
but maybe we're too early in the
Yeah,
process.
no, that's very, very valid, and I hear what you're saying. I think part of the facility master plan committee, they'll do some visioning. We probably won't even talk about building as the first workshop at all. It's going to be about visioning. Where do we want this district to go and to be? Through the process, we will eventually get to build spaces and objects, bricks and mortar, but we want to take them through a process of like education, where do you want to be, construction, where do you want to be, and then the facilities committee makes a recommendation to the board, and the board still has the final authority to approve, modify, but what you want to do is you want to get a good cross-section of stakeholders that represent your community, because if you did go to a GO bond, you're going to also want the support of a larger committee than probably just the board. And you guys all have great ideas. I think just from a transparency and process standpoint, you're going to want to have stakeholder involvement beyond just the board itself. But they'll make a recommendation to you all, but you guys can, you know, not approve that as a master plan, or approve that with some modifications to it as well.
Well, and the other thing too is that, you know, this doesn't happen overnight, obviously. And so every board meeting or every work session or once a month or whatever, you know, we should be getting a report back from the committee if they've met to say, hey, this is what we're going down this, you know, we're looking at this, this, and this. Well, if there's something that sticks out and says, oh boy, we don't like that, obviously, you know, there's communication in the board meeting from the whole board to talk about it. But, you know, the whole board, you mean, you as a board member can have as much or as little input as you want on that. It's just a matter of, there's really no logistical way for the whole board, you know, without involving a lot of other people, because everybody has their own ideas as to what they'd like to see. And you can convey that, and that's the good part. The committee can look at all that stuff. But ultimately, yeah, the boards should be in contact, or should get plenty of updates and all of that at every meeting as to where we stand. And then Mike obviously would be part of the committee to give the board updates of that, you know, through the week too, as to what we're looking at. I mean, that's kind of the, but yes, you as a board member should have plenty of input, as much as you want, along that process. The unfortunate part is we can only have 3 board members be on the committee. But yeah, picking, I don't disagree with you, Christine. I think it's trying to pick, like, hey, I think we should do this. Well, that's the hard part.
By way of comfort, most of the districts that DLR and us have worked with start out right where you are right now. How do we get to a place where we're all on the same page? And that's what we're here to help you do. And we have a lot of processes that we go through to get to that point. And you shouldn't be there yet. And I can understand the discomfort with where you are. but it's not unusual for districts to be in that position to start. Wouldn't you agree, Andrew?
Yep, I agree, yep.
Any other concerns, questions, comments? Well, thank you all for your presentations and all that. I guess just looking for a motion for adjournment.
Second, well.
Well, we're really excited to be a part of your process, and I'm certainly looking forward to watching it progress and see how things develop. It's part of what I like about this job. Look forward to the future meetings.
Thanks, Mike.
So I have a motion and a second. Further discussion for adjournment? All in favor, Nancy Manson,
Yes.
Morgan Brown,
Yes.
Jeremy Weller,
Yes.
Christina Sharp,
Yes.
Jeff Bittner,
Yes.
David Weber is yes.